Thank you for those readings. Those were lovely and very apropos. First, let me introduce myself. I am Nayaswami Jayanti, and this is Nayaswami Bhavani, and it is our great joy and blessing to serve you this morning by offering the Sunday service on your behalf. I had an interesting experience this week, and I thought I would start with this. I don't know if you recall the story that Dharmadas told recently. It might have even been last Sunday, when he talked about the man who was questioned by another man, what are the two most important days in your life? And the man thought about it. My birth, I guess. Maybe my death, I don't know. And the man said, no, your birth, certainly, but then it's the day you realize why you were born. And you know, I thought a lot about that. It's pretty profound. And it's interesting to me how Divine Mother works, because this week I was doing something very worldly, involved with my job. I was sitting in a car at the airport, and I was waiting with a colleague of mine, our medical director for the program that we offer. And he's a wonderful, delightful man. And we were chatting, and we were sitting in the free lot waiting for another colleague to arrive at the airport. And almost out of the clear blue, he said, you know, I've been listening to these great courses that you can buy, you know, on DVD or CD and listen, either audio, I think they're all audio. And he said, I was listening to this story, and he said, it was fascinating to me. It was a story about this missionary who went to Africa. And he met a tribesman there, who was the head tribesman for the village that he was going to be serving as a missionary. And the tribesman said, well, what have you come for? And he said, well, I've come to offer you what I have to share, which is, you know, my heart and my love for God. And the tribesman said to him, well, first answer me two questions. What are the two most important days of your life? And he responded, well, you know, maybe my birth, I guess, and I don't know. Maybe my death. And the tribesman said, think again. The second most important day of your life is when you discover why you were born. And it's like, if I didn't get it the first time, Divine Mother was going to make it clear that I was to get it the second time. And I love it when those things happen, because it's so clear. It's so clear, not something of my own doing, that God brings it to me, and it makes it very, very sweet and touching. But I have thought a lot about it, and it really is true. Why are we here? Why do we care? Why are we here this Sunday morning? We could be out enjoying the sunshine like hundreds and thousands of other people are doing, but we're here. And why is that? Because we have discovered that there's something in our life that isn't quite complete. There's something that's missing. Something in this, as Yogananda used to call it, the anguishing monotony of the mundane world, where every joy is followed by a sorrow, and every sorrow is followed by a joy, and we go chasing after desires of this thing and that thing, fill in the blank, a new house, a new wife, a new car, a new dress, a new child. I mean, you know, fill in the blank, it goes on, thinking that if we just get that desire fulfilled, that then we'll be happy. And it never quite works out. The Buddha said, for every desire satisfied, 100 more spring up. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I think he's right. They go on endlessly until we finally say, like the naughty baby in the Whispers of Eternity poem that Master wrote about the naughty baby, we say to Divine Mother, okay, I'm done. I don't want any more toys. I want you. You know, nothing in this world is ever going to satisfy me completely. I know that now, so now I want just you. And that's probably the second most important day of our life, when we arrive at that point, when we realize that there is nothing in this world outwardly that is ever going to bring us the joy and fulfillment that can only come from God within. So I wanted to start with that story because it sort of sets the framework. The topic for today is the law is perfected in love. And I remember I've had this topic in years past to give a Sunday service about, and the law is perfected in love. What does that actually mean? Well, I went back to the book that Swami wrote called The Promise of Immortality, which is my preferred reference source for preparing for Sunday service, and he sort of fills in a lot of the gaps. And as is indicated in the reading in the Rays of the One Light, he's talking about the law being the law that Moses gave. Now, Moses gave that law, the Ten Commandments, to the Jewish people after they had been spending 400 years or so in slavery in Egypt. And so they weren't living as a nation in Egypt, and in order to kind of collect their consciousness and get them back on track, God gave them the Ten Commandments through Moses, which gave them some rules, really moral rules, for kind of realigning their behavior and allowing them to come back into the awareness that they were a Jewish nation. And so that was the reason that the laws came at that time. But it's also important to know, if you understand the teachings about the yugas, Sri Yukteswar said that the way this world works is that our sun and solar system are revolving around the center of our galaxy in one huge elliptical pattern. I think I had this correct. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And in that process, our sun is also revolving in an elliptical pattern around a stellar dual out there, somewhere, yet to be discovered. Now, everything else Sri Yukteswar said back in the late 1800s and early 1900s has been proven true, except that one thing. They haven't found that star yet. But everything else he said was true, so I'm sure we'll find it one of these days. But as our solar system moves towards the center of the galaxy, our consciousness on planet Earth rises. And as it moves back again after circling that center of the galaxy, consciousness on Earth declines. Now, this is a 24,000-year cycle, so it's not something that happens overnight. But what happened was that Moses came before Christ, as we know, and Christ himself came 500 years before the darkest hour in that 24,000-year cycle. So what that meant was the consciousness that was prevalent on the planet at the time that Moses gave the laws was pretty, well, they were in Kali Yuga, which is the yuga, the age of matter, structure. Everything was firm. People had to have rules and regulations because that was how they held their behavior and their consciousness together. But it was also, it was like their consciousness was dense, and it was difficult for people to perceive truth on a higher plane yet because the consciousness in general just wasn't ready yet. But then Christ came, and again, he came 500 years before that darkest hour, so things were still dark. So he came to show that grace and truth were the higher level, that divine love and personal inner experience of God was really what they were looking for. But the Jewish people weren't really ready to hear it, and again, it was a dark time. Now, the Jewish people were wonderful people. They had already determined that they loved God and that living a God-fearing life was important. So they had a God-centered life, but mostly they were thinking about the laws, you know, what they could eat and not eat, washing your hands before you eat, all of which are good moral laws, but they didn't know how to relate to that deep inner experience because they just weren't there yet. In fact, it's probably likely on a karmic level, from what I have read and understand, that the Jewish people got scattered as a nation later because they did not recognize that Christ was the Messiah they were waiting for. And had they been able to do that, and had they been able to follow the teaching he was trying to give them, which was really that inner teaching of divine experience, perhaps they would not have suffered all these thousands of years. Now, before we get too wrapped up in dissing on the Jewish people, we have to remember that we were probably Jewish people at one point in our life. So we probably walked that walk and talked that talk and found out that that really wasn't, you know, the solution or the answer. But it wasn't until this age of Dwapar Yuga, which is the next higher age, which started in 1700. So we went through a transitional period between 1700 and 1900, sort of like the cusp of that change between Kali Yuga, which was about matter and everything was solid, and you know, into moving into the age of energy. Well, it's no coincidence that Paramahansa Yogananda came in the 1920s to this country, well after Dwapar Yuga had started, and he brought the original teachings of Christ. That was his mission. Christ appeared to Babaji and told him that the people in the West are no longer following my original teaching. I want you to send someone to the West who can teach them how to practice inner communion, because we'd gotten so far away from that. And so that was his mission, to come in the higher age, Yogananda's mission, to bring that teaching at a time when the general consciousness had started to lift. Now, it doesn't take very much observation if you look around to see that we are in the age of energy, right? I mean, I remember not so very long ago, so many years back, that personal computers were an amazing new technology. Now you walk around with one in your hand, and it has the same capacity and more as that one that was, it came about 20, 30 years ago. We live in the age of energy. We have transcended time and space. You can get on a plane today and fly to New Delhi and be there in 16 hours. You can pick up the phone and call Calcutta or Paris or some other place on the planet, which you couldn't do back in the earlier ages, in the dark ages. Pony Express was really pretty amazing in its time. But, we would hardly think that's amazing in our time. So as man's consciousness has lifted, then it was possible for these masters to come back and bring those teachings that would teach that higher teaching of deep inner experience. And that was their purpose. That was why they came back. That's why Babaji sent Master Yogananda to the West to bring us these teachings. And so we are living at a time when more and more people are receptive. In the West, we have learned that science has taught us, if it's taught us anything, is don't take anything on somebody else's word. You have to, can you repeat it? Can you duplicate it? If you can duplicate it and somebody else can duplicate it and somebody else can duplicate it, then maybe it's true. Well, Yogananda used to say, don't take anything I say on my word. Practice these meditation techniques and see if they work for you. It doesn't do any good for an avatar like Jesus Christ or Yogananda to come and tell us how wonderful they are. All you poor suffering people, it's too bad you don't have what I have. No, that wasn't what they came to show us how great we are potentially, and to give us now, in this age, through Yogananda, the techniques that will take us to that point, so we can have that direct inner experience of what Christ was talking about. Christ said the kingdom of heaven is within. When I was growing up in the church as a young girl, I go, yeah, but how do you get there? Where is it? Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. Where's the door? The mystical teachings in the Bible are not explained very well by the Bible itself. But if you read what Yogananda tells about the teachings of Christ, then you begin to understand the deep mysticism that he was teaching in, but he lived in such a dark age that he had to put most of it in parables and leave it to them that have ears, let them hear. Not everyone had ears, and I don't mean physical ears. There were a lot of people around him that had ears, that heard him, but did they really hear him? Did it change them? So we are blessed in this time because we live in a time when we have the techniques that we can have that experience. It's interesting, Yogananda had to establish an organization, and organizations are not a bad thing. The church over the 2,000 years since Christ has gone through a lot of organization, and during the darker ages was really institutionalized and centralized so that there was only one authority in the Western Church, and that was the Pope. But what happens in a situation like that when so much power is attributed to someone who doesn't have the capacity of an avatar to really speak from the level of divine wisdom is the church ends up amassing power, and with power they tend to amass wealth, and so we kind of get off center for a while. And so it happened in the Roman Catholic Church that was the case. But at least the Roman Catholics recognized the saints. Now, granted, they didn't canonize them until they were safe, dead, and gone. You know? So they can't argue anymore. But at least they recognized that there was such a thing as saints. Because when the Protestant church came around, they said every Christian was a saint. Well, okay, potentially that's true. But in reality, not the case. So it didn't give people the sense of where they were going. What is the roadmap? Where am I headed? So institutions serve a purpose, and organization is helpful, but it always has to be second to our inner experience and to our inner search for the divine. There's a story told that Yogananda had a female disciple, and for whatever reason, he knew what was good for her spiritually because she was his disciple and his responsibility. And he sent her outside the organization to do some work in the local community. And she had been used to living within the organization, the community there on Mount Washington. And she said to him, "But Master, what will the organization say?" And he turned to her and he said, "Who are you following, the organization or me?" And to me, that really makes it really clear that it has to come from inside. It has to be the Guru's grace within each one of us. It's not something... The church doesn't make saints, in other words. Ananda will never make saints. God makes saints. The organization only allows the opportunity for people to come together who are like-minded. And they can support one another, certainly. But there's also the danger, and this has happened historically, that organizations can develop sort of corporate arrogance. You know, my church, not your church. We have the teaching, you don't. So there's always that danger. It's just human nature. There's no getting around it. But if you study deeply the teachings of both Jesus Christ and of Yogananda, you will see that the emphasis always, and the emphasis of all the saints who have ever been liberated, is always about their inner experience. Whether you're talking about an Eastern saint like Ramakrishna or Yogi Ramiya, or you're talking about Ananda Ma, or you're talking about St. Francis or St. Teresa of Avila, it doesn't matter what religion you're talking about. Every saint that has reached that level of superconsciousness says the same things. It's about loving God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. And in fact, when Christ came, he said that those were the two most important laws in all of Judaism, was to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength. And the second most important law is love thy neighbor as thyself. Yogananda added to that, love thy neighbor as thyself, because essentially your neighbor is yourself. But those are the laws that Christ gave to us, that we have to learn to abide by. And we get to that point by meditation. Yogananda said of his mission to the West that it was twofold, to bring back the original teachings of Jesus Christ and the original teachings of yoga of Krishna. As I said, Yogananda came during Dwapar Yuga, when we were in the age of energy. I'll collect my thoughts here for just a second. Yogananda did establish an organization because he knew it was necessary. It's very interesting to note that Babaji, who lives in the Himalayas and is only seen when he allows himself to be seen, certainly has no organization. Lahiri Mahashaya, who was his disciple, would not allow his disciples to build an organization around him. He would not even allow them to put into print the teachings that he was offering. Ananda Ma would not allow any kind of an organization to be built up around her. And she was a great saint of India. Sri Yukteswar couldn't have cared less about organization. he really came for only one thing in this incarnation, as I understand it, and that was to be the guru for Yogananda and give him the teaching that he needed to prepare him to come to the West. So out of all of those great saints, the only one that decided to develop an organization was Yogananda. But it's because he knew that it was necessary. He said, churches are like the hives, God is the honey. But we have to remember that it isn't the hive that's important, it's the honey. Jesus Christ could appear today, or for that matter, Yogananda, right here in this room, and he could touch our heart. He could change our consciousness, but he couldn't give us, essentially, the bliss that we're looking for, because we have to earn that. Yogananda said that when bliss comes, when ecstasy comes, it's because the magnetic call of your heart, full of divine love, is so strong that it creates the magnetism that draws God to you. And he said it is inevitable. It's not like maybe it'll happen. It is inevitable. All we have to do is improve our loving. I thought it was wonderful that this topic came up today on Valentine's Day. And happy Valentine's Day, by the way. We are all Divine Mother's Valentines. It's so reassuring when you read, let me just repeat it here. So that we not get discouraged. I just wanted to read again what the reading today says from the Gita. Nay, but once more, take my last word, my utmost meaning have. Precious thou art to me, right well, beloved. Listen, I tell thee, for thy comfort this. Give me thy heart. Adore me. Serve me. Cling in faith and love and reverence to me. So shalt thou come to me, I promise true, for thou art sweet to me. And let go those rights and writs, duties, laws. Fly to me alone. Make me thy single refuge. I will free thy soul from all its sins. Be of good cheer. Now, Krishna lived before Christ. So these words were spoken by Krishna long before Christ. But it's very touching that Yogananda echoes the same sentiment some 2,000 plus years later in a beautiful poem that he wrote that I like to read at least once a year because it's not something that we see that often. When I am only a dream, and I want to close with this prayer, this poem. I come to tell you all of him and the way to encase him in your bosom, and of the discipline that brings his grace. Those of you who have asked me to guide you to my beloved's presence, I warn you through my silent talking mind, or speak to you through a gentle, significant glance, or whisper to you through my love, or loudly dissuade you when you stray away from him. But when I shall become only a memory, or a mental image, or a silently speaking voice, when no earthly call will ever reveal my whereabouts in unplumbed space, when no shallow entreaty or stern stentorian command will bring from me an answer, I will smile in your mind when you are right. And when you are wrong, I will weep through my eyes, dimly peering at you in the dark, and weep through your eyes, perchance, and I will whisper to you through your conscience, and I will reason with you through your reason, and I will love all through your love. When you are able no longer to talk with me, Read my whispers from eternity. Eternally through it I will talk to you. Unknown I will walk by your side and guard you with invisible arms. And as soon as you know my beloved and hear his voice in silence, you will know me again more tangibly than you knew me on this earth plane. And yet, when I am only a dream to you, I will come to remind you that you too are not but a dream of my heavenly beloved. And when you know you are a dream, as I know now, we will be ever awake in him. God bless you all.